The Secret Science at Work by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 16. The Problem of the Blocked Path. In our HRA approach to the problem of the unblocking the Aka cord path to the high self by bringing to light and draining off or rationalizing memory tangles, we began with a close study of modern findings concerning what Freud called fixations, or what later psychologists called the complex. Then it says in brackets, as is well known, Freud stubbornly held to the theory that the instinctual sexual urge was the basis of all troubles in the unconscious. End quote. However, it is possible to use his term fixation in a broader sense to cover all memory tangles. Close brackets. Freud defined the word fixation thus: one instinct or instinctual component fails to accompany the rest along the anticipated normal path of development. It is left behind at a more infantile stage. The libidinal current in question then behaves in regard to later psychological structures as though it belonged to a system of the unconscious, as though it were repressed. Complex is defined as an emotionally colored idea or idea pattern that has been repressed. We shall use the terms interchangeably, and they will be understood to refer to the stumbling blocks of Huna phraseology. The word rationalize is used here as meaning to make rational, also to endow with reason. In gratitude to Freud and the psychologists who followed close in his footsteps in exploring the human mind, it must be admitted that, had they not first postulated the subliminal or subconscious part of the mind, and discovered that it held unrationalized memories which cause a variety of mental and physical ills and irregularities, we might not have been able to understand even in part what the Kahunas meant by their phrase, things eating one inside. Things eating one inside. And that's in quotes. Nor the symbolic words of the biblical Kahunas, who spoke of stumbling blocks, thistles, thorns, serpents, and secret sins. In passing, it's interesting to note the fact that early missionaries in Hawaii in the years between 1820 and 1860, even with the Kahunas at hand able and willing to instruct and help them to an understanding of Huna, failed to grasp the idea of the subconscious or low self as distinct from the middle self and high self. Of course, the subconscious was not yet known in the Western world, so the difficulty is easily understood. The Kahuna words for the three selves were, respectively, Unahipali, Uhane, and Amakawa. But the best the missionaries could do in compiling a dictionary was to translate these three words as some kind of spirit. Fortunately, the complex had been identified sometime before my study of Huna began in earnest, and the barrier to full understanding was lowered. The verity of the fixation is now well established, and while the Kahunas were more specific in describing the Aka threads, the thought form structure, and the tie-up of mana with the complex, the modern view of the matter is very similar. Freud, being a medical doctor, became interested in the patients who came to him with distinct symptoms of some neurotic or psychotic trouble, often accompanied by physical symptoms or illness or abnormal muscular functioning. He gradually evolved a method of treatment for these cases which depended on the finding of the complex held in the subliminal part of the mind, our low self, and the rationalization of the unrationalized tangles. The subliminal was found to be secretive and stubborn to the extent that it would allow the fixation memory units to come to the center of consciousness as recalled memories, either by invitation, coercion, or through the use of suggestion and hypnotic pressure. He fell back largely on the observation of the dreams of the patients in his care, and upon careful studies of the circumstances surrounding the appearance of such reactions, it might be laid to the presence of the fixation in the subliminal. Other workers joined Freud in his research, and soon there was built up a table of symbolic correspondences intended to show the relation between the dream and the complex. For instance, that when there was a dream of a pot-bellied stove, it indicated that the subliminal self was thinking symbolically of the womb from which the man had been born. Each person, no matter what his characteristics, was thought to have his subliminal almost identical sets of symbols to use for the same things and experiences in dreams. The arguments given to back up these slightly preposterous claims were none too good, and the part played by suggestion, even though this was supposed to have little or no part in the process of dream study, was seldom properly evaluated. Freud's insistence that sex frustrations were at the root of most fixations caused later investigators to differ with him on many points. Jung and others added to the theories and leaned slightly more toward adding the superconsciousness in some form to the picture. But the method of Freud remained in more or less general use. Dreams continued to be observed, recorded, and studied for their significance in order to learn through them what was buried in the subliminal part of the mind. Where dreams were few and far between, the method was augmented by free association of ideas on the part of the patient, who, in a relaxed physical state, would tell the analyst what came into his mind automatically as an associate idea whenever a certain thing, person, place, or event was mentioned. The play of imagination, when allowed to run free, such as in picturing what random ink blots might suggest to the viewer, was included in the methodology. One of the later additions to the system of treatment was strange indeed. The analyst created an artificial complex by thinking up some possible situation which, had it been actual, might have caused the patient to form fixations. This event was then related to the patient with a strongly urged belief that it had taken place in fact, and more important still, it had been the cause of the original fixation, which was bringing about abnormal physical or mental reactions. How much the element of suggestion entered into such a procedure was seldom stated, but good results were often reported. One of the defects in the methods used by the analysts has been that too much effort has been given to finding the complex and too little to a general renovation and correction of the overall attitude of the patient toward life and his fellow human beings. It seems not to have been realized that detective thinking on the part of the middle self was often the thing that prevented the complex from being found. For instance, the many hates and fears of the patient may have come from wrong ideas about people, things, religions, and the like. These might be in need of study and correction. Of course, such ideas can be the result of the complex, but all too often the doctor has made the mistake of thinking that seemingly illogical hates and fears had their roots in some complex, when in truth the educational life experience of the patient had been to blame. The greatest defect of the system, however, has been its lack of a clear understanding of the necessity of correcting the morals of the patient. A man's mental structure is a house built upon sand if the individual is not made to see that envy, greed, senseless anger, and the taint of dishonesty are wrong and are contrary to the good of his fellows. nor has the part played by a sense of guilt apparently been given full recognition, whether the sense is lodged as a complex in the subconscious or is something shared by both the low and middle selves, especially when the vague thing called conscience smites the patient. Freud was forced to recognize the conscience as a very important factor in melancholia. This is a condition in which the individual suffers greatly from what Freud described as over-severe punishment by conscience, which is used as a whip by the superego. Freud's superego concept was anything but a glimpse of the higher self as he examined his patients. It was something he thought of as the result of the pressures of moral teachings which caused a repression of unconscious urges. The superego was to be deplored, as was all influence of religion. There are many psychoanalysts practicing today who follow Freudian principles only, not taking into account the later valuable work of Jung, who recognizes the religious impulse in man as the least valid. Jung, who recognizes the religious impulse in man as at least valid. These doctors apparently have felt themselves bound by the materialism of science, and for that reason have carefully refrained from advancing any theory which might resemble current religious beliefs. Religion has meant to most of them muddled thinking and confusion. Moreover, it was supposed by churchmen that the Bible made no mention of the subconscious or the complex. For this reason, even today, attacks by religionists on psychoanalysis are not infrequent. This is a strange state of affairs. The analysts know full well that many fixations which are called upon to treat stem from the wrong religious teachings, from fear of eternal damnation. On the other hand, the results obtained by the analysts have been so slow and so uncertain in coming that many of them have taken to making full use of the patient's religious beliefs and of his faith in God in offering treatment. A happy medium has to be found in churches, which have opened clinics for the treatment of their members, who have staffed them in addition to religious advisors with psychiatrists and psychologists. What neither the analyst nor the average churchman recognizes is the part played in mental abnormalities by the influence of spirits. This influence might be so slight that it is mistaken for the natural bent of the patient, or it may be marked but not recognized for what it is. Even in cases of complete insanity where obsession is so evident that it has been named obsessional insanity, the scientific standing of the psychiatrists will not allow them to give a moment's heed to the possibility of spirit interference. Most churchmen, even with the Bible filled with mention of evil spirits and demons who cause sickness and insanity, have gone over to the side of science in this matter. Despite all these defects and limitations, however, it must be freely admitted that much very good work is being done for many people, and that finding and removing of complexes, if nothing more, often results in marked improvement, even if the progress in this narrow corner of the field has been painfully slow. The dissatisfaction with the slowness and uncertainty of psychoanalysts and the almost complete failure by churchmen, comparatively speaking, to get healing for minds through prayer resulted a few years ago in a strange revolt of amateurs. They broke away from professional analysts and the religionists to try to improve upon the conservative theories and to invent newer, faster, and better analytical methods, especially methods which one amateur might use to help another. Outstanding among these revolutionists was L.E. Eman, E-E-M-A-N, of England, whose relaxation circuits had been discussed in Chapter 1914. He began experimenting and writing on psychoanalytical lines as early as 1924 and made some very interesting discoveries. He evolved a system of locating and removing fixations, named it myognosis, myognosis, and described it in articles and lectures as well as in his book, Cooperative Healing. He did not hesitate to add the element of religion and of the superconscious to his theories, and for that reason, in spite of excellent demonstrations which he made of his methods, gained little recognition from psychiatrists. The revolt against the slow and reactionary psychiatrists and psychoanalysts of the Freudian school was turned into new channels in the mid-year of 1950, by a layman, L. Ron Hubbard, a writer of science fiction and one who had been a battle casualty. That's it. A battle casualty in the Marines. All right. Mr. Hubbard had, as much as Mr. Eamon, been led into a study of the mind and the nature of its own difficulties. He had spent some time inventing and trying out various methods of administering mental therapy and had evolved a set of theories to match his methods. Whether or not he realized that there were numerous people in America who were ready to revolt against the older theories and therapies is hard to say. But as soon as he published his work, Dianetics, and offered leadership, hundreds flocked to his banner. Dianetics may have owed a great appeal to the fact that it offered a therapy for everyone, not just those who recognized mental quirks, psychoses, or neuroses. The theory was advanced that everyone had engrams, engrams. And then it says in brackets, something similar to a complex, to a greater or lesser degree, and that each engram tied up with it a part of the mental strength of the individual. It was promised that when the engrams were found and brought to light and broken up by the new methods, the great release of mind power would make one thus cleared in quotes, much more able mentally than before. These results were to be obtained in from 40 to 50 hours of application of the methods. Such application demanded nothing more than a careful reading of the book by two people, after which they could audit one another. It was said, and thousands of amateur auditors were soon experimenting with this new method. It was found that the promised release of more mental energy and the healing of ills of a psychosomatic nature were not being as widely realized as had been anticipated. It was evident that training and experience were needed after the book had been read. Meanwhile, Mr. Hubbard, to fill this need, organized schools in which students might be audited and taught at first hand to use the new auditing methods. The demand for services of trained Dianetic auditors was already so great that the 6 weeks course seemed to many to be an excellent and simple way to enter a new profession. A few of the HRAs were attracted by the possibilities and promises of the new therapy. Some tried auditing their friends and being audited in return. Some hunted up some newly trained auditors and submitted themselves to the treatments, and some enrolled in the schools and became professional auditors. In the HRA bulletins, a new therapy was discussed at length, and reports were given from time to time on the experience of the HRHs who had tried out Mr. Hubbard's methods. At first, the reports were uniformly hopeful and often enthusiastic. Then a doubt crept in, a feeling that Dianetics' methods did not live up to their promise. Mr. Hubbard himself was among the first to realize this and began to revise his theories. and ways of encouraging the recall of events, often prenatal, which he believed to have caused the engrams. New techniques were frequently announced and made available through short printed releases. While Mr. Hubbard was revising his conclusions from month to month, other laymen, most of whom had taken the Dianetics professional course and had gone to work as auditors, formulated theories of their own and offered therapy in a slightly different form. The Eidetics, Eidetics, the Eidetics Foundation was one of the new groups founded by former Dianetics auditors. In this group, the approach was based on Gestalt psychology, and the subconscious was not recognized. Therefore, the engram, which was so reminiscent of the complex, was replaced by other concepts. Naturally, with no subconscious, there was no superconscious. E-therapy was the contribution of Mr. A. L. Kitzelman, Kitselman, another of those who had taken the auditing course. However, e-therapy was something that Mr. Kitzelman had been formulating for a number of years on the side of theory. He had been a student of religions and psychology, and it was his belief of whatever it might be that prevented a person from being at his best mentally or physically could be removed by God, in whatever form one might think of him, capital H. This divine being, which he designated as E, that's a capital E, to make it fit all forms of religion, had but to be requested through prayer to take charge and correct conditions by correcting their psychic causes. It's difficult to evaluate these new therapies as they are in a state of growth and experimentation. Constant changes in theory as well as practice are appearing, and new terms are coined to fit the new ideas in a bewildering manner, since the prime interest of the HRA was to discover whether or not a better method of removing blockings of the path was becoming available. We shall have to wait for a more settled period when their methods shall have been tested and proven. From the standpoint of Huna, we agreed that, like psychoanalysis, they were not working with the three selves, and therefore their work was bound to be incomplete. The extremely important matter to Huna of the manner... Let me read the sentence again. The extremely important matter to Huna of the mana was completely unknown. In some of the methods, there seems to be an effort to cause the ones treated to give up old hates and fears, to try to be better in their attitude towards life and towards those around them. But there was not the strong, forceful teaching of the Kahunas in this part of the work, nor the insistence on amends being made to those who have been hurt. One thing that Mr. Hubbard has been discussing in recent writings, which sounds promising, is the influence of demons. The Eidetic Foundation is also working along that line. In this respect, there is a definite step toward agreement with Huna and away from the limitations of science, which have prevented modern psychiatrists from such recognition. There seems to be a definite fear on the part of the originators of the new therapies that they may fall into the same pit which has so long awaited the Christian revivalist healers, who would by now have replaced most of the doctors in the land if their healings had been more permanent. If their healings had been permanent in more cases. Any healing which does not remove the cause of the trouble, be it physical or psychic, or the result of spirit influence, is but a temporary aid. This is what the revivalist healers failed to understand. Even the primary work of aiding the patient to rid himself of old hates and fears, jealousies and envies, is done for only a short preparatory period, if at all. before the actual healing is attempted. And of course, the complexes are not recognized and not removed. Apparent healing may be obtained, and often is, but when the complex, which caused the trouble in the first place, is not removed, it is but a matter of time until the healing has worn off and the malady is back, usually worse than before. An example of this difficulty, and a very real one it is, was brought painfully to our attention in the HRA in the case of T.A.L., who was healed by telepathic contact and prayer by Mrs. R., as has been related in an earlier chapter. T.A.L. was entirely free from his painful stomach condition for a time after the healing took place. He could eat any type of food without harmful results, and was convinced that his healing was permanent. But without warning, the trouble came back, and greatly disappointed, he was forced to visit his doctor and ask for treatment. It is evident that as long as the cause of these troubles is not removed, the healing will not be permanent. The auditors of the Dianetics type fall into the same pit of a lack of permanency in their healings in some cases. This comes about through a lack of understanding broad enough to cover the religious aspect of the problem. The complexes and the spirit influence, no matter how described and renamed, cannot be audited and removed so that they will stay out of the way unless the patient is entirely desirous of giving up the old hurtful ways of life and going over to the kindly and helpful life. And above all, he must make contact with his high self and keep the path open. No system of mental therapy can be complete which does not take into consideration the almost universal impulse of man to recognize some form of higher being and to look up to it worshipfully, to look to it as a possible source of help in time of trouble. Psychologists still argue the question of whether there may or may not be some basic instinct behind worship of a superior power, but it is very possible that such an instinct is as real and as urgent as Freud found the sex urge to be, or as others consider the instinct to survive, or the drive for recognition or dominance. I have seen primitives stand lost in adoration of a spectacle of great beauty, giving every evidence of an impulsive reaching out and yearning for something in that beauty which is beyond and higher, which is truer, nobler, and more real. Man cannot live without hope, and when all else is gone, he can still have hope of survival and a future life, if he is allowed to have faith in a higher being who will not fail him. Any therapy which does not build upon such hope builds poorly. More and more this is being understood in psychiatry, as psychiatry enters the churches to help in the healing ministry being offered for troubled minds, but not until the significance of the demons of the Bible and the obsessing spirit eating companions of the Kahunas is recognized can the psychiatric part of the ministry be complete. And that concludes chapter 16. Chapter 17 is entitled Are Fixations Brought Over from Former Lives? Well, that'll certainly be interesting. So I hope you'll join me there. Till soon.